Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome in to a Thursday night football edition of Establish the Show. I am Gary Hartman, joined as always by the one, the only, the great Cody Main. Without a hat today, Cody. How you doing?
You know, I get a haircut like twice during the football season, so I feel like when I do get that said haircut, I should probably show off the fresh cut. So yeah, we're going no hat today. Probably be the last time you guys see me without a hat until like week 16 or something like that. So enjoy it.
Yeah, you're looking fresh. I know a bunch of you had success on Monday night. Congrats to Brandon Adams on his big takedown. And I hope we can keep the train rolling. Flag plants aside, because the content, everything else is good. Flag plants aside. I might just sit this one out to give you guys all a break for my shitty flag plants. But we'll see.
We're still talking to the media team about scrubbing any part of me saying that you could play Captain DST and that was in any way viable. We're scrubbing that entirely from the internet until maybe the last few minutes of the show when I say it's viable again.
Yeah. Meanwhile, it seems like I was going to say, it seems like it might be viable. All right. We got Saints Jags tonight. Seems like one of our old school, typical type of Thursday night games. I always feel like we got these types of games forever on Thursday night. I think right around 40 on the over under here. Sounds like Trevor Lawrence is going to play. Jamal Williams back for the Saints. Zay Jones still out. No major injury question marks, it doesn't seem, which is good. Cody, how are you feeling about the slate from a macro perspective here?
Yeah, it seems like we've got all the news that we were kind of waiting on. When I started writing up this game, I kept thinking, God, this just seems like a lot could break one way or another. And it seems like it kind of broke the way we expected it to. Jamal Williams is going to play. He will be activated off IR. At least that's the expectation at some point today. And we'll talk about his role in a second. Trevor Lawrence, it sounds like, assuming everything goes okay in pregame warmups, is going to give it a go. We'll talk about him in a second as well. That's going to sap a little bit of his rushing expectation, but not expecting T-Law to be a huge runner of the football. So it doesn't really change his projection all that much. But yeah, this is what we would expect from a Thursday night football game. Usually it's just not that much laid out in front of us. Usually we've got 44.5, 45.5, 46.5 point total. Vegas isn't expecting much scoring here. 39.5 point total as of the last time I had checked. Maybe it's gone up a little bit since then, but by all accounts, it looks like it's going to be a pretty ugly game. You know what happens when we're expecting an ugly game. Maybe we get a barrage of points. I think there's a little bit of reason for optimism on the offensive front. We'll talk about that as we go through this thing. But, from a overall slate breakdown, it is an interesting one because a lot of these guys at the top of the board are priced similarly and project similarly. And I think the way that, the math is going to want you to optimally play this is to try and jam in as many of those guys as we can. Kind of had a similar spot on Monday night with Dallas and the Chargers, where everything was saying just get as many of those guys as you can, and that's kind of the route that BA went to win the Millie. He had Michael Gallup at captain and just had all the studs after that. Gone on to Brandon Cooks, ended up being a good win for him. I think this slate kind of sets up similarly, where it's like try and fit in Kamara and ETN and Chris Olave and Calvin Ridley if you can, and in order to do that, you might need to go cheap at captain. So I think from kind of a macro perspective, it's really an interesting slate with a lot of different routes to go.
Yeah, and there's some interesting names that you can go on the cheapish end at captain. We'll talk about some of those, at least in the mid-tier. I think maybe not quite the Michael Gallup 2,800 play, but there's certainly like guys in the 5K range. I think that'll be interesting captain choices that we'll get into. It seems like there are definitely ways to get unique here. If you want to go onslaught, if you think this game's going to go over, for sure, you can kind of hammer in some of these offensive studs. We shall see. I always get scared on these Thursday night games with overs. Sometimes they're always weird short weeks. I still can't believe the Jaguars haven't had a bye after the 2 straight London weeks, and then they come out last week. They look good, but now they're on short rest. Like the schedule makers are not doing the Jags any favors here. So a little bit scared about laying eggs, but yeah, I think overall, I could see this game going over too.
Gary, that is an interesting note. Why don't you? So it was London back to back, and then they came back for a divisional game at home, right, against the Colts, and now they're on the road on a short week against the Saints, crazy. Right? That's the way it was set up on the scheduling.
Yeah, it's nuts. And usually it used to be you had a London game and you'd have a bye automatically the next week. Yeah. Now apparently you could have back-to-back London games and no buys and a short week before the bye. I mean, crazy. But good on the Jags for going out and winning last week. We'll see tonight. Let's dive in. Let's talk about that Jaguars quarterback, Trevor Lawrence. I think a significantly higher ceiling than Derek Carr, although our points are only saying about 1.5 points. In my opinion, a much higher ceiling. However, I don't know what his health status is. So Cody, have you read anything on Lawrence and how, I know he's going to play, or Peterson says he expects him to play, but you have any insight on, his level of, is he at 100%?
Not a whole lot. It does seem like that it was at least trending towards like a true game time decision, and it was going to kind of be based off of feel. Trevor Lawrence is a guy that prides himself on being out there, prides himself on playing through kind of minor pain stuff. And of course they all do, don't they? But it seems like he is far from 100%. And I don't know if I could put a number on it. Is it 80%? Is it 90%? I think what it means to me is that we're likely to see much less design rushing, if any at all, and much less scrambling, which could turn into more checkdowns, could turn into more throwaways, could turn into less design pass plays to begin with. So I think that kind of part of that plays into why we're expecting a 39.5, 40 point total in this game. We could just see a lot more design rushing attempts for the team as a whole, and a lot less attempts at explosive plays from Trevor Lawrence in the aerial attack. I still think with all of that baked in, with his projection the way it is and the price tag, what we're looking at, 9,600 for a starting quarterback in the Jaguars offense with the weapons that he has around him, I still think that he is a cash game target, and maybe not a necessity given the wide receiver options on his side of the ball, but I still think a priority target in cash game contests, if not at captain, certainly at flex, given the safety that we feel like he provides. And I kind of feel the same way in tournaments, 61.1% projected total ownership. Feel like I would probably come in around that number in a 150 set, and certainly a priority target in small field and 3 max type contests as well. And as far as GPPs go, I highly question the ceiling, though, enough to get over 9.5% captain ownership. I think I would come in under that number just in favor of his pass catchers, whether it be Ridley or Kirk or Evan Ingram, even at the tight end position. I would much rather try and target this aerial attack from a captain perspective via its pass catchers and just keep Trevor Lawrence in the flex.
My dad is over right now. He just had some meeting in the city, so he's taking some calls from my apartment, and he's like, "What show do you have at 3?" And I was explaining to him Showdown, which, to try to explain Showdown to someone that's never heard of a 1-game slate. So anyway, and the example I used about why I would rather use a receiver in the captain than a quarterback a lot of time was that this exact one, particularly tonight. I think it sets up that way for Trevor Lawrence. Also worth noting, you mentioned the ceiling. Like, I still think in a vacuum, Trevor Lawrence's ceiling is super high. We saw it down the stretch last year. I think in a vacuum, it's much higher than Derek Carr's. However, we have not seen that ceiling so far this season, and now he's playing hurt, right? His most DraftKings points so far, 20.7 in week 5 against Buffalo. Other than that, he's been right in that 10 to 16 range. Really ugly from a ceiling perspective for Trevor Lawrence. Definitely not what we expected coming into the season, for sure. Now, it's still early, and I think we'll have some of those high 20s games from him. I don't know if it's tonight in New Orleans, who has a pretty good defense with the injury. So I'm a little scared too. I do agree there's a floor, though, and I wouldn't mind getting him in flex, even in tournaments where I can. But I like him paired up with like a Ridley or Kirk or Ingram or whoever captain, for sure. Let's talk about the Carr side of things. It took him, I think you wrote about in your article, it took him 50 pass attempts to reach 20 DraftKings points on Sunday. Like, that's what you're getting with Derek Carr. To me, he's still like a check down Charlie type. I don't even know if the numbers bear that out, but we've seen some of these targets on Kamara over the last couple of weeks. I don't know. It's just hard for me to get excited. That said, they're at home. If you like this game to play up, I don't want to be fading them at all.
I hate to box score watch, but it's been pretty ugly. And, usually the one calling card to quarterbacks in Showdown is the fact that, hey, they touch the ball on every single play. There's generally a pretty safe floor from the quarterback position. And now that DraftKings is pricing them down overall, and particularly in this case where we've got Derek Carr as a home favorite against the Jaguars secondary that can be had at 8,800. I mean, it's rather shocking that we're kind of not just windmill slamming this in, particularly in cash, where I think it's close to him being the guy, but I think you can make cases for some of the Saints pass catchers, certainly for Alvin Kamara, who we'll talk about in a second. I don't think it's a slam dunk for Derek Carr in cash on tonight's slate, although I think if I were building one cash team, he would probably be in it. But it's been 8.12 DraftKings points or fewer in 3 games this season.
Yeah.
And as you mentioned, only really got there, quote unquote, got there in the box score last week because he threw 50 times and happened across the 300-yard mark, got the bonus on DraftKings. So I think there's far from any sort of safe floor on Derek Carr in this slate. I do think, though, the price tag is fair enough and cheap enough that he's probably the guy you should go to in cash games. But we'll talk about some of these options. The Saints offense is condensed enough. They're not really throwing to the tight end with Juwan Johnson out. There isn't really a wide receiver 4 they're throwing to. Rashid Shaheed is kind of more of a deep threat who's going to get a couple targets a game. Like the target distribution is so narrow in this offense that I think you can get away with not playing Carr in cash, even though that's not something I would usually advise.
Yeah, I don't have much to add there.
And no
I
captain
think once
for
again
me on Carr in
no
tournaments as
captain
well. I
at
kind
all.
of feel the same way about like T-Law. Like if I'm getting a good Derek Carr performance, it probably means I'm getting a great performance from one of his pass catchers, and I would just rather have the pass catcher at captain. Yeah,
I agree with that. Tough to get too excited there on Derek Carr. But the price is right, and he brings obviously absolutely nothing with his legs, whatsoever. And all right, let's talk about the most expensive player on the slate in Alvin Kamara. Worth noting, Jamal Williams expected to play, and I'd imagine step right back into that now RB2 role behind him. But man, Kamara's role since coming off suspension has been excellent, Cody.
It's been great. And if he's not getting there from a rushing perspective, he's getting there as a pass catcher, as we always expect from Alvin Kamara. And really, like Jamal Williams being back doesn't change a whole lot for me. Is he less likely to get goal line work? Of course. Is he less likely to get some of the work between the tackles? Of course. That's not a huge problem for me when, since Kamara has been back, has had a team high 25.3% target share. And now he gets a Jags defense that is yielding the league's 7th highest target share to opposing running backs at 19.5%. This kind of feels like one of those very natural talent plus matchup plus opportunity type spots for Alvin Kamara, even at the 10-4 price tag. I think we can fit him in. And it is just that, the Saints offensive line obviously dealing with some injuries, going to have some turnover there. You mentioned Derek Carr is check down Charlie. He's likely even more of a check down Charlie tonight if his offensive line is in as many shambles as we think they're going to be with the injuries that they have up front. I think this is just a very clear, natural spot for Alvin Kamara to get peppered with targets again. Probably not the 13 receptions or whatever it was he saw in his first game back from suspension, but I do think that he is going to be an offensive focal point. Even if the Saints offense is inefficient, he can still get there on just racking up PPR volume on reception after reception after reception. So yes, with Jamal Williams back, it does sap a little bit of upside because you're really unlikely to get like those 2 touchdown type performances from him. But I think we're mostly looking at Kamara as a pass catcher in this game anyway.
Yeah, I meant to ask you up front also. Usually it's something I ask you before the start of the show. How is pricing looking tight tonight, or can you do most of what you want here?
You can get most of what you want. Of course, they priced up like Kamara and ETN to a degree where you at least have to think about it. But I didn't look at the slate, and certainly after running ownership, I didn't think of the slate as something that was particularly tightly priced.
Okay, good to know. Yeah, I mean, because for me, he'd be a priority in every way I kind of break down this slate. I think just excellent role. Both these running backs. We'll talk about ETN in a second. Like it a little less for ETN just with the matchup wise. But you mentioned how run heavy they're going to be, how sure that role is, and it's hard to want to look away. I think 62% total ownership seems even a little light for me in the flex. Like I'm fine getting into that. The captain side, also don't mind it, but as you said, I think there's an argument to be made tonight that you need as many studs as possible. So maybe I'd end up around the field on a Kamara captain type thing. But yeah. So Jamal Williams obviously makes your player pool here. I don't know to what level. It sounds like he's been practicing all week. I think he should have whatever they want his full role to be behind Alvin Kamara. I don't know what that is. I mean, they went out and paid him. We haven't seen these guys play together yet, so I don't know how they want to break this down. Plus, he's coming back off injury. Maybe he's back in. The price is fine, but I'd imagine he should get his full complement of work.
Yeah, it's coming back from a hamstring. It's coming back for his first game since week 2. It's a short week, so he hasn't gotten in a full practice. It's been limited practices for him, but pretty early. Again, usually the tone and the timing of these reports should inform our opinions at least a little bit, in terms of like when these guys are either declared to be healthy for the game if they're coming off a questionable tag or being activated from IR. And the Jamal Williams news came out pretty early today. So it doesn't sound like they were waiting for any sort of game time decision. This kind of seemed like the plan all along. And 4,200, I think, is going to keep the ownership down, which is nice. It's still really tough for him to get there. You need one of those Jamal Williams-esque 2 touchdown type performances, in my opinion. He's going to get his portion of the work between the tackles and certainly between the 20s. What you're hoping is they get close to the goal line and he plows 1 or 2 in. The way that, like, if you look at this from simulating this game out, the way that it works out is like when Jamal Williams finds a double-digit score, goes for 40 yards and a touchdown, gets to 10 or 12 DraftKings points, it's very likely that he's going to be optimal because that's enough at 4,200 to fit in all the other guys that you want from the expensive end. So I don't think that it's entirely crazy to play Jamal Williams, who's $4,200 at captain at 1.3%. Just kind of have to understand like what what you need from him, and that's really just to probably fall in the end zone once and hopefully twice, because I don't think he's going to give you a ton from just a work between the 20s type perspective.
Yeah, I mean, generally, I do think this tier of what just happened. This tier of like the 5-8, like Evan Ingram down through Jaguars defense or whatever they are probably interesting captain options here.
Way more than you would normally think. And that's kind of been a theme. And I don't know if it's a pricing perspective thing from DraftKings, or if it's just been the last two slates, how they've gone. But we had it with Michael Gallup. We had it with the Cowboys defense, the Chargers defense, that low end, 2,800 it was for Gallup, who was just way too cheap, up to like the 4 to 5K range. Those guys all looked really attractive because you could play them and then fit in everybody else that you wanted around them. So yeah, like you said, and we'll get to these guys in a second here, but Ingram, Shaheed, Jamal Williams, and even the defenses and kickers kind of come into play in those perspectives, just because of when they find that double-digit type score, it really allows you to fit in everybody else that you want around them. And if they find that score, it's pretty likely that they're going to be in, at least in contention for the optimal captain spot.
Yes, sir. Good breakdown there. Other side. Oh, Kendra Miller, make your MME pool. I mean, we're kind of guessing on what his role is here.
Yeah, I was thinking about that, and I feel like he just really gets squeezed out from both angles. First of all, he's 1,800, which isn't a free square. It's not the stone minimum, and he's going to get squeezed out from between the tackles work because Jamal Williams is back. He's going to get squeezed out certainly from any sort of goal line reps that he would have with Taysom Hill there and with Jamal there. And I don't know how much they're going to use him on like long down and distance plus 2-minute opportunities if Alvin Kamara has more of those opportunities open to himself because he's got fresh legs to handle those. So I think it really kills Miller's upside, at least in the very short term, with Jamal Williams back. So should he make a large field MME player pool? Yeah. I just don't know if I'd even get over the 5.9% that we're projecting right now.
Yeah, I think that's a fair. I don't know if I'd go there, especially like even in 20 max stuff. Like I don't think I'm interested in that dart. All right, let's talk ETN. Amazing role. I mean, and the ceiling has been excellent there. Was once again, I believe, optimal last week on the main slate, or was close at least. Wasn't efficient on the ground against Indianapolis, but still 2 touchdowns. He's adding a couple between 3 and 5 catches, it seems, every week through the air, and just a true workhorse right now. So, you're getting a little bit of a discount on Kamara, but been certainly, I think, somebody that we were probably too light on in the offseason was Travis Etienne. I think the Tank Bigsby hype got up a little bit too high there, and Etienne's really ascending right now.
Yeah, this is a really nice role for Travis Etienne. As you mentioned, he leads the entire league in rushing attempts with 113. Wow. He's handled 62.4% of the team's total rushing share, 47.8% of the red zone rushing share, running around on 62% of dropbacks with an 11.5% target share. And he's out there in every situation. Kind of the Kamara role that we saw from weeks 4, 5, and 6 is what Travis Etienne has done all season. He's out there for short down and distance. He's out there for long down and distance. He's going to be out there for 2-minute snaps. And so it really creates this nice floor, regardless of how the game goes. The Jags fall behind early, no problem. Etienne's going to be out there as a pass catcher. He's going to be out there in long down and distance and 2-minute opportunities. If they get ahead, certainly he's going to be a big part of that. He's going to get his share of the rushing work as well. I think he's got like a nice floor of 18, 19 touches with a ceiling upwards of 25. And Saints run D is not a gimme matchup by any stretch, but I don't think that they're any sort of world beaters. They rank 21st in explosive rush rate allowed, so I wouldn't expect Etienne to pop off a bunch of big runs, and they're 13th in stuff rate. So I think this is a defense that's going to be good against the run, but not one that if I'm getting a running back who's going to get 20-plus touches that I'm going to be afraid of. So I do think Etienne is a very strong play at 53.3% total ownership. I would like to get over that number. But again, kind of just with the way that the slate sets up, 11.6% captain ownership, one that I feel like I'm probably going to end up coming in under because I'm just going to have a little bit more exposure to that mid-tier at captain so I can fit some of these studs and flex, or more of the studs and flex. I should say. But yeah, overall, feel really, really good about Travis Etienne on the spot.
Yeah, nothing to add. Matchup's a little bit concerning, but volume's king. And I kind of agree with your take on total ownership and captain there. Bigsby, I mean, again, he's really iced these guys as a true workhorse. Bigsby, we saw. I don't know if you have what it's been like the last couple weeks. I know in the first few weeks of the season, we're seeing him spell him in the goal line a little bit. But I don't know what your level of interest there is in the rookie.
Yeah, not a lot. And again, it's kind of like the Kendre Miller thing, except there's only two guys in this backfield that you have to worry about competing for opportunities. But still, like it's not a free price tag, $2,200 for Tank Bigsby. He's actually got to do something for you to get there. And he has seen some of that short down and distance work. He did see some of those attempts inside the 5-yard line to start the season. But really lately it's been a lot of Travis Etienne. And I think that the fact that the team is having success with Travis Etienne back there is only going to incentivize them, especially on a short week, to keep trotting their running back one out there. Could you get enough work from Tank Bigsby to get there at 2,200? Yeah, but again, I kind of feel like the same way I do about Kendre Miller. Really low projection. The price tag isn't free, and he's at least coming with a little bit of ownership. 4.6% isn't nothing crazy, especially on a showdown slate. But for me, I feel like I'd probably still come in under that number.
Yeah, I would agree. Okay, let's talk receivers here. I'll stay on the Jacksonville side because I think getting this spot right, and obviously both guys can get there in Christian Kirk and Calvin Ridley. But getting this spot right, maybe is that we talk about every week. What's the spot we got to figure it out? If someone gave me a magical coin that I could flip and be told who to play with these two, I would love to know it. You broke down in your article kind of New Orleans susceptibility to the slot. Fair. So maybe it's Christian Kirk. But man, I love the explosiveness in the ceiling of Calvin Ridley.
Yes, this is the one. This is the spot on this slate that if I knew not even just the final box scores, but if I knew the target distribution on these two, I'd feel pretty good about selecting a guy. The tough thing is they project very similarly. They project for very similar ownership. They're almost the same price tag, separated by $400. And, really the roles have been pretty similar. I know that Calvin Ridley had the big week one. He's had another big game thrown in there. Aside from that, Christian Kirk has been a little bit more steady outside of that week one egg that he threw up. But yeah, 6 weeks into the season, Kirk leads the duo in target share while Ridley has a lead in air yard share and end zone targets. But also Kirk's got a little bit more of a PPR friendly role where he's got a little bit higher catch rate on a lower ADOT. So it all kind of balances out. These two look very similar, and that's why you're seeing it reflected as such in both their base projection and their ownership. I wrote about it in the article, and as you mentioned, like the only reason I can even side with Christian Kirk, I think, is because of the notion that New Orleans can be had a little bit more through their slot than they can on the perimeter. They've got a decent cornerback out there on the perimeter who I don't think will lock down Calvin Ridley, nor will I think he even shadows him permanently. But I do think that the coverage for Christian Kirk in the slot will just be a little bit more friendly as the Saints give up the league's third highest target share to opposing slot receivers. And that's where Kirk runs 72.1% of his routes. So it's really close. I feel like either way, either guy I say here, I'm going to end up ultimately being wrong because it just feels like one of those spots. But everything else being equal, which it really is, I feel like I would just side with Kirk in this spot. If forced to choose only one, granted, I'm going to have a portfolio of lineups here, so I'm going to have exposure to both. I know some people are only playing one lineup and they've got to make that decision, but it's a coin toss for me, and I guess I'm just gonna have to side with Christian Kirk if I'm picking one name.
And it seems like Chad is with you, by the way. Yao mentions first one to say Lattimore loses.
I didn't say it.
Yeah, I said it. There you go. I lose. Maybe the way I handle this, because I do think that Calvin Ridley, our ceiling projection is a little bit higher on Christian Kirk, so I could just be wrong. But as that true alpha guy in my head, in my gut, Calvin Ridley still has a higher overall ceiling. I think there's like 40+ point games in there for Ridley, where I think Kirk probably caps out of those low 30s. So maybe the way I handle it is I get over the field on captain on Ridley, under on total own, and then over on total own on Kirk type of thing. I think that's something that I would consider. I love both guys though. And I think we should actually just loop in Evan Ingram here because we mentioned the middle of the field. I didn't realize how good the underlying stuff had been for Ingram. You broke it down in your article too. Over 20% target share, great after the catch. I have a bias with this guy from his time on the Giants because he was a terrible New York Giant, something else I was just talking to my dad about. But he's been a completely different player with the Jaguars. There's no doubt about it. And 5,800 is a really friendly tag for the slate, as we were talking about.
21.2% target share through 6 games. He's fourth on the team in air yard share on a 4.0 yard ADOT. And if you guys have watched the show or consumed any of my content, you know that I do not like these low ADOT guys because they really they have to do something after the catch. You can't just catch a 4-yard out route and fall down and find a ceiling that's going to make you optimal on a showdown slate. Evan Ingram has not been that. He's not been a catch and fall down type tight end. As I incorrectly called Logan Thomas a couple of weeks ago, he's been a guy that has done something with his receptions after the catch. He's right up there with Calvin Ridley in terms of yards after contact per reception and missed tackles forced per reception. I mean, that all kind of checks out. Evan Ingram is a fantastic athlete, big-bodied guy who's going to be matched up against DBs and linebackers who should be at a disadvantage given his size speed profile. So I think that all kind of checks out. And the $5,800 price tag is super nice. It's something that's going to allow you to play a little bit more of these studs. It's not a full punt captain spot, but it is a spot where you get a little bit more salary relief in order to play some of the top end guys that we've talked about in flex. So I do like Evan Ingram quite a bit as both a captain option tonight and certainly as a flex.
Yeah, I agree. And, and with Zay Jones being out here, and we'll talk about Jamal Agnew in a second, but like this is a pretty concentrated target tree here between these three guys. Yes. And, obviously Etienne will get his couple targets per game too, 4 or 5 targets, but it's really concentrated here. So if you want to invest in this Jaguars passing game, if you want some Trevor Lawrence captain lineups, which again, we already talked about how we're not that into it, but I want at least 2 of these 3 in every Trevor Lawrence captain lineup personally. I think that's kind of how that would break down for me. Any negative correlations on these 3 dudes?
Yeah, I think the way pricing works out, you probably should. Like if Christian Kirk in captain, you probably want to dock Calvin Ridley. That kind of plays itself out in the Sims. Yeah. It would do the inverse as well. If Calvin Ridley at captain, you would want to dock Christian Kirk. Evan Ingram is kind of in that mid-tier of the price tag where you can see him get there while one of his other receivers has a big game, but I would not want to play Evan Ingram at captain with both Ridley and Kirk in flex. It seems like a tough needle to thread where if that all happens, if you get a captain worthy Evan Ingram game, plus Ridley gets there as a flex, plus Kirk gets there as a flex, seems like Trevor Lawrence is probably going to have a massive day of his own. And in that instance, you'd probably just want Trevor Lawrence in the captain spot. So I would do some negative correlations there and probably some max ones of those rules, but nothing crazy. The price tags are all relatively fair on these guys. So it'd be like, we talk about this a lot. The solver, if you dock them 1, you give them like the thumbs down on the solver, then they drop by 8%. Their projection drops by 8%. If you boost them, it raises by 8%. So like for me, if I have Calvin Ridley as a captain, I would probably dock Christian Kirk by 8% as a starting point, and then just kind of run it and see how things go. And if I need to go higher, I'd go up to like 12% and so on and so forth. So you kind of have to like play with it to see what you're actually getting in your lineups when you run it, but it wouldn't be like a major dock for me. Pretty small one.
Those are great nuggets there, Cody. Good stuff. And that's the stuff you're getting for free here, guys. So show us some love. All right. Jamal Agnew seems like an easy click, man. 400 it should be kind of right in that wide receiver 3 role here tonight. And we've seen him in the past be able to produce. I mean, this was before Calvin Ridley, and a lot of it was before Christian Kirk too, because if you go back to, I think it was the 2021 season, I'm looking right now in his history, he had from weeks 5 through 10, basically 4 out of 5 games in double-digit DraftKings points. Like, it's not someone that can't produce at all. And, that is real salary saving there at 400. So I'm guessing he's going to be the popular cheap click. How do you handle that?
Yeah, it's tough because what happens in the tournaments that I play, the smaller field, higher stakes stuff, this is a guy that will project, 14 to 16, maybe upwards of 18% if the market comes up on him a little bit. In large field stuff. And yeah, that's probably a reasonable outlook for him in terms of his large field ownership projection. Like in small field stuff, just because he makes every single roster construction work at $400 and has a decent base projection, we could be looking at like 30%, 35%. And at that point, it becomes a much, much, much more difficult click. I still think there's a pretty wide range of outcomes here, even after accounting for the $400 price tag. This is a guy that could easily go out, run a route on 40 to 45% of dropbacks and see 0 targets. He could also be a guy that's $400, goes out, runs a route on 40 to 45% of dropbacks and sees 5 targets. And so that range of outcomes is really difficult. And generally, when I feel like there's that wide of a range on a guy who is going to be owned, I generally just want to come in underweight. So if I was playing a 150 max or a 20 max where I think I feel pretty good about the 14 to 16% projected ownership, probably be okay getting over the field on that. But in some of the smaller field stuff where I think he could steam up in a big way, I would much rather just come in underweight.
Yeah, I think that's probably right. I'm not afraid to click on him though. If I'm in a lineup, I feel really good about, even with ownership. Just again, like this is a guy that's earned targets in the past, right? Like I'm looking back on some of his boxers. He had a 12 target game in 2021. He had a six target game where he had 450 and 2 last year. And I know it's different with those three guys we spoke about that we like all three of them, and Ridley, Kirk, and Ingram ahead of him. But at 400, if he's going to be out there, like I don't think it's terrible chalk if he gets a little bit chalky. We'll see. I guess Strange is the tight end punt here for the Jags. Brenton Strange. I don't know nothing.
And I think should make the player pool. He's a little bit of a different story than the other guys that we've talked about that maybe should not make your player pool, or will make your player pool, but you shouldn't play a bunch of. He's a little bit cheaper at 1K, similar 3 to 5-ish% projected ownership. I think you can at least paint yourself a narrative here that because Zay Jones is out and they might need a little bit more of 2 tight end sets with Trevor Lawrence banged up a bit, you could at least paint yourself a narrative here that they get Brenton Strange out there more than they would normally. And we saw it in week 6, 29% route participation, had a really nice targets per route run rate. It's a guy that you're still probably capped at like 2 to 3 targets. But I think in large field tournaments, you can do much worse than Brenton Strange. So I don't hate it. This is probably the guy of the punts that we've talked about that, factoring in price and ownership, I feel the best about so far.
Yeah, I think Strange is a pretty good pivot to Agnew, assuming that he's going to be. I know that 600 might matter, but I do think he played 34 of 64 snaps. I'm just looking on PFF right now. Agnew played 20. Tim Jones played 13 for what that's worth. If you're in full 150 and you want another pivot, he should be lining up as the wide receiver 4. All right, let's go to the New Orleans side. I know we spent a lot of time on the Jacksonville pass catchers, but I think it was a worthy conversation. New Orleans, a little bit more straightforward. Chris Olave still the alpha here. We have not seen it in recent weeks. Beginning of the season, he was looking like he was paying off that ADP with some big box scores. And then I guess last week he had a 7 for 96. It was those 2 weeks, week 4 and 5, that he really just was nowhere to be found. But I still like the upside on Olave here. 9K, he's a little bit more expensive than the Kirk and Ridley tier, which is a little bit hard for me to wrap my head around, but this is still a very talented player.
Yeah, I think that will hopefully keep ownership in check a little bit, but I think people are pretty willing to hold on to their priors on Chris Olave, and for good reason. The role has been awesome. 27% target share, 40.4% air yard share, 31.4% first read target share. He's got 5 end zone targets. He's on the Bailione model. And he's had these really nice games, but for somebody that you paid a second round price tag for in the offseason, he hasn't had that explosive game yet, but he's been super, super close. And if he could have just found the end zone once or twice, we'd be talking about Chris Olave in a much different way. I think he's got games where he's gone 8 for 112, 8 for 104, and 7 for 96. I always talk about these guys that have 10 for 101 upside, and Chris Olave's got that in his bag. He just needs to find his way into the end zone one time. If any of those box scores he goes for a touch, you're looking at him as a guy that's has had that 30 point game, and suddenly we feel a little bit different about him. Someone mentions in the chat that he's due. I kind of feel the same way, that he's due. Yeah. He's had these games where it's been so close and he just hasn't gotten there. So I think we could be on the cusp of one of those 10 for 101 games for Olave. Even though we're not a huge fan of check down Charlie, Derek Carr, I still think this is a spot where Olave could find himself behind the Jags defense, and we could be looking at a really nice game for Olave.
Yeah, I agree. And so if we're talking about how Olave has been super inconsistent with, really opposite poles, Michael Thomas has been the model of consistency. The problem is there's no ceiling with that consistency. It's been 6 to 9 targets, 40 to 60 yards, 40 to 65 yards, no touchdowns yet. So there's probably some positive regression coming that way. But he's been out there and his target share is good. And, he's 7K. That seems right. What are you thinking?
Yeah, model of consistency. It's almost crazy how consistent Michael Thomas has been, and maybe there is a little bit of a ceiling there coming because he just hasn't found the end zone, like Chris Olave struggled to find the end zone. But it's been super consistent. 24% target share, 27% air yard share, 10.8 yard ADOT. He's still catching everything. So you're getting 6 to 9 targets for Michael Thomas, at least 6 in every game so far this season. You kind of know what you're getting. And for that reason, where he's priced $1,800 cheaper than Carr, like I think Michael Thomas and Olave are probably equally as strong, if not better, cash game plays than Derek Carr, just given their consistency in terms of opportunities and the way that DraftKings scoring works with the PPR friendly upside and stuff like that. I think that those guys can be considered over Derek Carr if you can't make a Derek Carr cash team work. And for the same reasons, I think they make for really strong flex plays in tournament lineups as well. Of course, I like Olave a little bit more as a captain, but I think I don't think you should completely count out Thomas. I think there's a ceiling there. I think we just need him to find the end zone.
Yeah, I agree. I just don't. I think this is the kind of receiver he is at this point in his career, which is like, and it doesn't help that Derek Carr is not this explosive play quarterback, but just like this very like 10.8 yard ADOT, very middle of the field possession receiver. Like you're going to get your 5 for 50. But do we still have a 10 for 90 and a touchdown in there? Like those Michael Thomas games of 2018, 2019, we're getting 14, 15 catches, like crazy stuff. I don't think that's in there, especially playing next to Olave and Kamara for that, for that example, is getting all these targets from someone like Carr also. So I don't hate it at 7K. I'd much rather play Olave, but everything about it seems pretty efficient, maybe a little overpriced for what his, box score has been, but ownership, captain ownership, like all that seems fine. He should be considered in all those spots for sure. I don't disagree. I have tight end up here, and we'll just go in salary order. Is Taysom Hill the so bad it's good play here? Because 6,200 is absurd. But he was really run out as a traditional tight end last week. And what do you have, like 7 catches or something? Yeah, 7 catches on 8 targets. Like, what the heck? Taysom Hill really running out as a tight end. And, no Juwan Johnson still. Foster Moreau is kind of like this really low usage guy, maybe a little bit around the goal line. And Jimmy Graham's just a guy at this point, an old guy at this point. So, man, 6,200, crazy. But you always get some rushing opportunity potentially. You never know what kind of weird stuff that might happen with Taysom Hill. So at 6,200 with, what are we looking at? Less than 10% total ownership. To me, it's the so bad it's good of the night.
Yeah, it's close, but I maybe you've talked me into it a little bit, but I was thinking as I was writing this up, like him running out as a traditional tight end seems like the worst possible way to utilize Taysom Hill. And now we've got Jamal Williams back. I think, or maybe I saw it come across my phone. I think the props team took an under on Taysom Hill rushing yards earlier in the day. And I think a lot of that just has to do with you've got Kamara now in the backfield. You've got Jamal Williams back. You've got Juwan Johnson out, which means more traditional tight end Taysom Hill. And you've still got Kendry Miller who can soak up a few of those opportunities. Like there's a chance here that Taysom Hill just doesn't get any rushing work at all. And I think that's bad for him. I think what you really want is Taysom Hill near the goal line, scoring a touchdown, hopefully 2, and then getting his few receptions. That's fine. At 6,200, it's tough for me to get there, but maybe you're right. Maybe it is the so bad that it's good play. He's got an okay base projection, certainly not going to be played at 6,200, and maybe Taysom Hill can be a good traditional tight end. I personally doubt it, but it looks like the field agrees with me. Only 9.1% projected ownership. So it could be one of those plays that helps you separate in GPPs.
That's all it is. And he's just such a weird player that you never know type of thing. Like, I don't want to fully rule it out. He could fall into the end zone twice in some weird ways or whatever. Also, who knows? Maybe they give him a couple snaps under center. Maybe Derek Carr gets. There's paths to it, and like he's easily my 4th favorite of these top 4 that you're seeing here. And let's talk about Shaheed here, because I love Rashid Shaheed as a player, man. I absolutely love him. I wish he had a bigger arm quarterback, but they still take a couple shots downfield to him. Played 76% of snaps last week. Again, like I like the role, I like the price, I like the ownership. I want him at captain because I think there's a ceiling there. I just like Rashid Shaheed. It's a little bit, wide range of outcomes type of play, but we talked about that mid-tier being what you need. He seems like a good one tonight.
Yeah, this is the classic Gary Hartman spot. Get over at captain, 2 or 3x the field even at captain, and just come in underweight at flex. If Shaheed's going to get there, it's a 13.8 yard target share. It's a 26.1 air yard share on an 18.2 yard ADOT. If check down Charlie Derek Carr can find the arm strength to put one in Shaheed's spread basket, he could absolutely pay off that 5K price tag and be the type of guy that you need in order to fit the rest of these studs. So I love Shaheed as a captain play. Not so crazy about him as a flex play, because if I feel like I'm getting a good enough game from Shaheed on one of those or multiple of those big plays that he gets down the field, I feel like it's probably at his 5K price tag going to be enough to put him in optimal captain consideration. And if he gets close, then I just want the rest of those studs in flex. Give me as many of those guys that I can load up: Alvin Kamara, Travis Etienne, Christian Kirk, Calvin Ridley. Give me as many of those guys as I can put in flex around a Captain Shaheed performance. And I think that's the way to play this. You got 3.4% projected captain ownership. Get yourself 7, 8, 9, 10% Shaheed at captain and not worry about how much you have of him in the flex. Because if he gives you a big game, hopefully it's enough at 5K to put himself in that captain consideration.
Yeah, I mean, the guy's just a playmaker. So, like, you have a seal. Like, there's a natural ceiling built in, just the way he's used. Explosive plays. They gave him a couple carries last week. I don't know if they do that again with Jamal Pierre, but like, I think they want ways to get the ball in his hands. I just think he's a really good player. So I again, low floor. We saw weeks 3, 4, and 5. He had 6, 6, and 5 fantasy points, right? But he had 18.3 last week, 20 in week 1, and those big plays are in there. So. And he's got a nose for the end zone. I mean, I know he only has 2 this year, but I remember him scoring a bunch down the stretch last year. Like he's a good player. So at that 5K with that, I agree with you on the captain. I would approach it the same way.
And this is a guy that we always talk about in the article too. Like you want to make sure you're getting paid off with at least low enough ownership to make it worthwhile. I didn't really know when I wrote up the article where I thought it was going to land. I thought maybe 25 to 30%. I think if this is a guy who comes in whatever contest you're playing, high teens, low 20s, I feel like that's pretty acceptable. Given his price tag, given his projection, that you can accept that wide range of outcomes on Rashid Shaheed when it's high teens, low 20s, where you wouldn't feel so good about it if it got up to like 30, 35, 40%, and then you're feeling pretty gross about clicking him in.
Yeah. Yep. Agreed. I hit on the Foster Moreau point. I mean, also probably a little overpriced here at 3,200, especially if Taysom Hill's going to be playing full on tight end. And then Jimmy Graham, he scored already this year. I mean, 600. I'd be a max one of these 3 guys, I think. But any thoughts on the other 2 tight ends?
Yeah, agreed. And on Moreau, like with Taysom Hill running out more as a traditional tight end, you're getting less opportunities there for Foster Moreau. It's tough to go there. He's a guy that like true touchdown or bust type tight end. If he doesn't find the end zone, he's not going to be anywhere close to an optimal lineup. Yeah,
and I assume Graham's really just out there for mostly goal line stuff. I think he has 2 targets on the season. One of those happened to be a touchdown, but that's a tough click. I think even in prime time, Jimmy Graham, as Pete says, it's a tough click. Okay, let's get to DSTs and kickers. And I know we got a hard out in like 5-10 minutes, so let's break it down for me, Cody. What give me the defensive shtick first. What are we feeling on the Ds tonight?
Yeah, let's start with defense. I think we got to get to the defense stuff and talk about it again. I made an ass out of myself last week by saying, or I guess it was Monday night, saying you can play DST, and I said you can even play DST at captain given the price tags and given what it allows you to get. I think the thought process was still right, because if you look back at like winning lineups, and I know people were talking about it after we mentioned it, Brandon Adams won the 4-4-4-4 milli, the $4,000 buy-in milli with a Captain Michael Gallup team, and really got a pretty bad run out from Michael Gallup. We had 10 targets, but only caught 3 of them for 24 yards. Ended up needing Brandon Cooks, who found his way into the end zone. But I think the thesis of the play, as we like to say, was right. It was a cheap guy who allowed you access to monster games from Dak, monster games from CeeDee, monster games from Keenan Allen, monster games from Justin Herbert. What you want in those situations is a cheap guy to do just enough to put himself in consideration while the rest of the studs score relatively close together. Of course, if you have a guy who goes out and puts up 35, you're going to need that guy in captain no matter how much he costs. But if all the studs put up 18, 20, 22 points and are relatively close where you need all of them, then you need a cheap guy who can help you get all of those pieces into a lineup. For Brandon, that happened to be Michael Gallup, who helped get him there. Honestly, on the slate, 7.2 base projection, 13.7 point ceiling on a player, ignoring, name and ignoring position here, that's $3,800 is actually pretty attractive. And the Jaguars defense will get a Saints offense that's going to be without 2 offensive linemen. They're going to get a turnover prone quarterback in Derek Carr, a guy that likes to take sacks in Derek Carr. And I'm not crazy about the Jaguars defense. I don't think they generate pressure at a super high rate. I think price tag's fair. I think projected ownership here is fair. It's not a spot that I'm worried about like we've had defenses in the past where they're maybe $1,000 overpriced and going to be overowned. I think this is a relatively reasonable projection on the Jaguars. And I think, they, for some of the reasons that we've talked about throughout the entire show, I think they make sense as a potential captain option in order to help you fit in some of the higher price studs that we're trying to go to tonight. And if you get 8, 9, 10 points out of them, you're probably really happy, because there's not a whole lot in like this sub 5K range that you can feel comfortable about.
Yeah, I think they're just too cheap. That's really cheap for a defense. 3,800 in a spot that's not bad either. and they're not bad. Their defense is bad. All right, kickers. Well, talk about Superdome. I feel like kickers are always relevant in these type of games. The group, the Saints kicker is slightly more expensive. They're projecting pretty much identically here, though. Any thoughts on the kickers here?
Yeah, I sent out a tweet, maybe it was yesterday or the day before, like the pricing on the kickers has gone up drastically this season. It was like 3,900 from 2020 to 2021, jumped up to like 4,200 on average in 2022. And now over the last 4 slates of the 2023 season, and that includes this one, they're at $4,700 on average. We're looking at Brandon McManus, who's 4,800, and Bailey Groupie or Group, who is 5,200, which never thought I'd see a kicker north of 5K, but he's $200 more expensive than Rashid Shaheed. He's $400 cheaper, $600 cheaper than Evan Ingram. He's $1,400 more expensive than the Jaguars defense. And I guess it does make the cash games a little bit more compelling, just on the simple fact that like these guys just aren't auto clicks anymore, but they're really expensive now. And, whereas like 7, 8, 9 points might've been enough when they were 3,900, 3,800, 4K, like you need him to bang home a couple of field goals in the spot to even really feel good about it. So I think it's fine. The Superdome's good, low scoring game. It could be like one of those classic, 12-9 type games where you want both of them. But I'm having a tougher time clicking kickers right now, given the way that the pricing is set up, than I am the DSTs, which is something I never thought I would admit out loud.
Yeah, when you put it that in the way that the Saints kicker is $200 more than Rashid Shaheed, like even if you think he's got a way higher floor, Shaheed has a way higher ceiling. Like unless you're getting one of those 7 field goal type games, which it could happen. Okay, let's go to flag plants here. I don't think we really have time for questions. Cody, of course you get the honors because I'm just a complete embarrassment.
Yeah, I've been a mess too, and finally capitulated on DST for the Monday night game. That ended up going poorly for me. I'm going back to my bread and butter, which my bread and butter is guys with mouth-watering ADOTs who are pretty likely to put up 0 DraftKings points, but when they don't put up 0 DraftKings points, or in this case 6.3 or fewer, they're liable to go out there and put up 18, 20, 22 DraftKings points. And this week, this slate, it's Rashid Shaheed at 5K, and specifically captain Rashid Shaheed. The target share is pretty uninspiring, 13.8% through 6 games, but the air yard share at 26.1% and the 18.2 yard ADOT. I think if check down Charlie can find his way onto a couple of deep attempts in this game, I think and hope that they go to Rashid Shaheed. I hope they connect, and I hope he does enough to find himself at least in contention for the optimal captain spot tonight.
Yep, was in my mix for sure. And so maybe you want to fade it because I would have probably gone there if Cody didn't. So if you're on the Gary fade train, which is totally reasonable right now, that's fine. I'm going back to another bread and butter of ours, and that's tight end on Showdown. Evan Ingram has been the model of consistency from a target perspective this year, and we're just waiting on a massive game, but he's been like 8 targets seemingly every week. I know he was chalky for main slate this past week and kind of came up short despite scoring 37 points, but we're waiting on a big game. He's been right on that 11 to 13 point range. Yard after the catch stuff is good. I love the price as a little bit of a pivot to the 2 big guys as well. And if you're having trouble choosing between those 2, just go to the guy that is the other target earner in this offense. So I like Evan Ingram tonight. I do think one of those 3 guys, certainly maybe 2, will be viable, but I'll take the price discount with Ingram and the roll. And there you go.
We took a player on each offense, which I feel like is a good thing for us. When we double up on Denver Broncos on a slate that also has the Chiefs on it, that's just bad vibes from the very beginning.
Yep. All right. Agree there. Cody, we will talk offline, but I'm interested in doing a Sunday show for this Eagles-Dolphins game. So I don't want to promise the people anything. I'm interested. I don't know if you're interested or around. We haven't even spoken about it. I'm interested.
Could be through week 7, the game of the year.
Yeah, it could be. It definitely could be. But I think if we do it, it has to be paywalled because we can't keep giving out all this free stuff. So check out establishedthrone.com. We have all great stuff going on for you. Cody will be in the Discord chopping it up. Any questions you got for tonight. Meanwhile, he has to go be a good father and make sure his son knows he's there when he gets home from school, like the kind gentleman father that Cody Main is. And that'll do it for us. We'll be back potentially Sunday night, definitely Monday night. Good luck to everyone tonight. And good luck to me to get out of my flag plant rut and hopefully do better by all of you. All right. Take care, everybody.